Good morning. I'm Dr. Billy Taylor. This is the third of a series. I'd like to welcome you to the Mary Lou Williams Women in Jazz Seminar. And we have quite an imposing panel today because we're talking about something that is of vital interest to people in the field of jazz regardless of gender, but we're going to focus on the problems that hopefully will be helpful to women. As we said yesterday, we are dedicating this whole series of things to the memory of Helen Keane. Helen Keane, as I said earlier, was a role model for anyone who wanted to manage a jazz artist or wanted to be a part of the jazz scene. She was a remarkable woman who did it all. I mean, she booked her artists, she discovered new artists, she did everything that that should be done to enhance the careers of the artists with whom she worked. Helen Keane was a remarkable person, and we will miss her. We have on this panel some very special people who are contributing in their own ways many things to the field. You may or may not be aware of them because they are not as visible as some of the performers, but what they do is in many ways more important because it gets the word out, it gets many things, it starts many things to happen that without their input would not happen. Such a person is Rhonda Hamilton, who's sitting down on the end. Rhonda is a radio broadcaster who works for WBGO. She has one of the finest shows, one of the finest jazz shows in the business. She does live things, she does commercials, she does a lot of things that really get the word out. Her show is in the middle of the day and it's listened to by many people in New York because I can tell you because I hear people who say, I heard on Rhonda's show so-and-so, I heard you, or I heard whoever it was they're talking about. And she plays just a wide spectrum of the music. She is quite eclectic in her tastes and does the kind of exposure for new artists and for artists that may not be as well established as some of the artists you've been hearing on this festival, and really brings them up to the best of her ability to that level. So she is a very special person. Rachel Lewis is someone that works for a record company that does a tremendous job in terms of getting exposure for their artists. She is the director of national promotion, so she can tell you some of the things that are necessary on a national level to really make these things happen. And believe me, it's not easy on any level to do some of the things that she does. Right here on my right is someone who is responsible for many of the things that you see on CBS Sunday morning. If you see jazz there, it's because she helped me put it there. And she is a jazz fan, someone who is knowledgeable about the music, and more than that, in this context, is very knowledgeable about television. She's the senior producer on the Sunday morning show and has the responsibility of keeping me honest and keeping a whole lot of other folks who are trying to get things that may or may not be good for us or television on the radio, but she keeps us going. And that's Marquita Poole-Eckert. Becca Pulliam is someone who I know, most of these people, most of you, most of us, are people who listen to music. And the place we're going to hear jazz is on National Public Radio. And we're talking about national shows, and she produces Jazz Set and many of the other things that you hear on a national level, because not only is she a fine radio producer, but she's a very fine musician. She's a pianist and transcribes things, and so, I mean, if you play it, she can write it down, so watch yourself. Leslie Gause has been writing about women. She is perhaps our premier writer on women. She's done many things that have really helped us understand problems of women, who they are, what they have done. She's documented the kinds of things that, the accomplishments of women, and actually reports on it, writes radio and television pieces that work in many areas, not just as they relate to women. She's a very fine author, Leslie Goss. So, having just briefly introduced the panel, I'd like to start with Rhonda and just have her tell you some of the things from her perspective that are good and some of the things that she would like to see happen, but just basically tell you where she thinks we are in radio from her perspective, and maybe some of the things that would help those of you who are anxious to get on radio.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would imagine, considering our topic, that what many people would like to know is how to get your music played on the radio. At WBGO, we do play a variety of music. We touch on different styles and different eras, but really with a concentration of music from, I would say, the 40s and beyond, bebop and beyond, into the 90s. We do make every effort to expose our audience to as much music as possible. Now, I can only speak really about WBGO. Things might vary from station to station, but at BGO we try to play as much new music as we can within the guidelines of our format. And in our format we play 3 new releases an hour. And some radio stations may play more, but that's the way we do it at BGO. As I said, we try to cover a wide variety of music, but one thing that I have noticed in the industry over the last year or so is that there is an overwhelming number of new releases coming out every week. And so it is really impossible for us to play everything or to do every new record justice. But we try to, you know, at least give people an opportunity to hear something at least once. Certainly the major artists, the veteran jazz artists, the established artists are the ones who are going to get the most airplay, those who are on major record labels like Verve, and the ones who have wider distribution. We're going to be paying more attention to those artists, but it is still possible for you as an independent artist, if you're producing your own CD, to get your music played on the air. But the most important criteria is that you're putting out a quality product. If you have something that is, you know, extraordinary at a very high level, you could very well get into a heavy rotation. That has happened many times over the years with unknown artists or artists who are on small, independently produced labels. So I would say if you're going to make a CD, it's important to be prepared. You know, don't just go into the studio because you feel like, well, everybody has a record out and I've got to put out a CD, you know, in order to get my name out there. You know, have a concept. Make sure that the quality of the music as well as the quality of the sound is at a high level, and put out the best that you can possibly offer. Let's see. If you are a new artist or a relatively unknown artist, it might be a good idea to include some standard songs on your CD, not all originals, because if someone sees something on a CD that they recognize or hears something that they recognize, they might tend at least to go to that track first and hear, you know, what kind of music you're playing, what is the level of the musicianship. So it's a possibility that you might get a little bit more airplay if you have a standard, which is not to say that you should, you know, really be so worried about radio airplay. I don't want to give you the impression that that you should let a radio station's format determine your music. You have to be the judge of that. But these are just little ways that you can maybe get some kind of additional airplay. If you want your music played on a certain radio station, I would say listen to that radio station. Listen to the kind of music that they're playing. That will give you an idea of what they're looking for. As I said, again, don't let that, you know, dictate your music. You have to be true to yourself, but that'll give you an idea. Don't send a CD to a radio station if they're not playing the kind of music that you play. You'd be wasting your money for that. You can use all this information just as a guideline. If your repertoire is varied, if the music on your recording is varied, it might be helpful to put a little note with the CD and indicate which tracks you think are appropriate for a particular radio station. Things like that can be helpful. But the most important thing to remember, if you're putting out a CD of your own, is to have your distribution in place before you send the CD to a radio station for airplay. When a new release comes out, it's going to get its heaviest play within the first, let's say, 2 or 3 months that it's in the record library at the radio station. If you give us a CD, and usually this doesn't happen, but it happens from time to time if there's, you know, some kind of miscommunication, and it's not available for people to buy in a record store, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You want people to be able to go out and buy your music. And, you know, if you just want it to get played on the air, maybe you'll get some name recognition, but it's not going to help you as much. So you should always have some place where people can actually buy your record before you ever send it to a radio station. And if you get a CD, and maybe it even takes you a year to get distribution, wait, because that'll be the best way, the best thing for you. Also, never send tapes. You know, some people make cassette tapes, and never do that, because radio stations do not play tapes. CDs, you know, it has to be a CD. When you send your CD to a radio station, you should find out who the music director is of that radio station. You can find out just by calling, and there are lots of lists also available. So send it to him or her. You can also find out who the individual DJs are. If you can afford to, send each of them copies. Include a little note, not a letter, but a little note, you know, saying, I hope you'll consider my CD for airplay. You can also call, but it's not a good idea to really badger people on the air because they're busy. At our radio station, you can call the studio directly and speak to the announcers. That's not the case in many radio stations. But if you want to call, you know, just make it brief and say, you know, thank you for playing my CD, or I hope you received it, and I'm so-and-so, whatever. You know, a personal touch is nice. You should also have your track times listed, preferably on the outside as well as the inside cover, and the personnel listed. Those of us who are on the air really appreciate things like that. It's one thing to have, you know, a nice design, a clever design, but if you have to hunt for the information, or, you know, if you have to, you know, it's something really fancy, it's like, oh, okay, that's track 2. It can actually, those little things like that can cut down on your airplay. You know, so make these things clear. And when I say have the time on the cover, that's important, because a lot of times in radio, time is a consideration. You're dealing with the clock. So if you can find out right away that a tune is 2 minutes and 35 seconds and that's what you need, then you're going to go to that record more quickly as if you didn't have the time. As far as additional promotion on the air, if you're performing somewhere and you would like to promote your gig by doing an interview, you should always try to schedule those interviews as far in advance as you possibly can. You know, if you have a gig on May 10th, don't call on May 5th. As soon as you find that you have a gig, try to call for an interview, because we get a lot of requests for interviews at WBGO and probably at other radio stations. So the further in advance that you call, the more of a chance you have to get a date for an interview that is advantageous to you. Always have a printed bio or a press kit, you know. And I mean a bio, not a resume, because some people send out resumes and all it says is where they went to school and, you know, I played this place, that place, and that's nice to know, but we want to know more information about you as a person. Someone who's doing an interview would like to have, you know, more background information on you rather than where you played. So have a press kit and a bio, send that in advance. I appreciate as much information as I can get. That's just my personal preference. If you're doing an interview, you should also be prepared. You know, be on time for an interview. Make sure that, you know, you get to the station ahead of time. Make sure that the station has your music, has your latest CD. Maybe there's something that's just coming out. Make sure that they have it. If you requested an interview, be prepared to talk. Have something to say. Act like you're happy to be there. Now, I'm saying this, it might sound, you know, kind of, you know, obvious, but a lot of people aren't. You know, you should make a good impression. This would be a good opportunity for you. If you don't have something to say, Or if you feel like, you know, you're too shy, maybe you're not ready, it's better not to do an interview. Wait until you're ready to do an interview and make the most out of it. You don't want to risk giving a, you know, a negative impression to your audience. If you can't make an interview, call in advance and let the station know, you know, that that's the worst thing. You should never cancel an interview unless it's absolutely unavoidable, you know, because in most cases your interview will have been promoted on the station. If you don't come, it's just very unprofessional, and it could again create a negative impression for you and for the station. What else can I say? I guess that's about it for now, because you have questions later.
We'll have questions on that and other things in a moment. But Rachel, as someone who works for a major company and you have major responsibilities with all the large roster you have, how do you go about doing that? And do you consider, how does one who is not major get to a label like that?
How does one who is not major...
A major artist, someone, how does a new artist, an emerging artist get to that level?
Okay. Well, I'm in charge of radio promotion for the country, for the Verve Group, which incorporates not just Verve, but also a contemporary jazz label and blues label and several others. Basically, not only are we trying to get airplay, but my agenda, which boils down to selling records and promoting my artists so that their subsequent records also get sold, comes down to getting airplay, working radio charts, because retailers care about how the radio charts turn out, tour promotion very extensively. Everybody on our artist roster tours pretty regularly, and so out of the 100 stations or so that are public radio and that play straight ahead jazz in the country, we'll have 30 different people all on the road going to different stations, and we're trying to set up interviews, as Rhonda said, CD and ticket giveaways, special contests and promotions, you know, just trying to make sure that the airplay is bumped up a little bit so that they can back announce it and say, by the way, Joe Henderson will be at Yoshi's, you know, next week. Be sure to check it out and stay tuned, and you can, you know, win a pair of tickets and his latest CD or something like that. Most of the artists that I deal with on a regular basis are major legend level artists. We also have several young lion artists. Maybe that's a passé term, but anyway, many... Lionesses too, I guess. But in any case, you know, they're fairly well-established artists. Even the younger ones, you know, Christian McBride and Nicholas Payton and so forth, are still really, really well-known both in the musician community and by radio and press and retail. But we do have some smaller, you know, some what we like to call developing artists, people who are on their first CD with us or with any label. And, you know, in that case, it's grassroots stuff. If you can't, you know, if on WBGO that week they've got Pharoah Sanders, Joe Henderson, Dee Dee Bridgewater, and Dr. Billy Taylor coming in, and you know you're trying to get a debut artist a slot for an interview that week, you know, you might have to be more flexible in your scheduling and with that particular station, and you might want to try some other stations as well that are university-based or have block programming or have like a 3-hour jazz show here and aren't 24-hour, you know, huge wattage jazz stations like, you know, the ones that you'd normally aim at. Or maybe you can get, you know, an interview or contest or something that's run in a different day part. If you're not signed to a label, whether it's a smaller label or a larger label, it basically same sort of strategy. You know, if the competition is really, really tough, then I would recommend just trying for some stations that don't have quite as large a profile, and also not saying, well, I have to be during drive time. Got to be on Rhonda's show. Got to be on there at 9 a.m. so everybody can hear me. People are listening at, especially people that hang out in jazz clubs, are hanging out, listening to the radio at 11, 12, 1. And, sometimes it can be easier to get on the air at those times. If you're in the position of promoting your own release, which can be difficult, even if you don't have an expert doing it for you, sometimes, I think all the time actually, it can be very advantageous to you to get somebody who represents you, even if it's your aunt, to get a list from Gavin or CMJ or one of the publications that lists radio stations and personnel and phone numbers and email, whatever, and get them to call and say, hey, have you checked out my new release? And I know you've got a lot of things on your plate right now, but why don't you take a special listen to maybe track 3, track 5, track 7, and and do some research on what is considered by that station radio friendly for that station, and because different stations have different personalities. WBGO is very, very different from KLON in Los Angeles. It's very different from WDNA in Miami. So even though there are common themes within public radio and within other formats of radio, there are big, big differences in programming, and it's important to, if you can't hear that station because you're not physically present there, then ask that music director when you finally get them on the phone to tell you a little bit about what is unique about their station, and they're generally quite happy to sit there and brag for a while.
When I came in this morning, I was talking with a young lady who's a singer, and she was reminding me that jazz singers have some rather special problems. How do you handle that in relation to the things that you do? You handle jazz singers. So
Sure.
how do you promote them? How do you promote them?
Well, I think the most important thing when you're marketing a vocalist is to emphasize that they're not the chick singer in front of the band. They are a musician. They need to be thought of in those terms. Yeah. Basically, they have some special obstacles insofar as some radio stations have slots for only so many vocalists per hour, and so I'm yelling at people all the time about that kind of stuff. It's like, get over it. But basically, they need to be marketed as musicians. This is a person who has a technique, who has an interpretation of the way a song should be done. Many of these vocalists are also composers, and hopefully, as Rhonda said, there will be some, now I'm talking strictly in terms of how to sell a record in this comment, right. Not as far as what is art and getting into all that. But as far as marketability of a record, it is very nice to have a combination of original compositions, whether it's yours or somebody else's that you've found, and standards, so that there's some sense of familiarity. And just because you have a standard doesn't mean that you can't whack out that arrangement, like Jane Ira Bloom. You can put a different spin on things, like Betty Carter has, and Herbie Hancock has with pop songs lately, and it doesn't necessarily need to sound like every other version out there. So what's unique about that artist, what makes that vocalist special, and most of all, give credit to that artist for being a musician.
Thank you. As a radio producer, Becca, what do you look for? I mean, everybody feels that, well, I've heard such and such on the radio, and I could do that, or I could do something. I got a better idea, or something like that. How do you? What do you look for? What do you do, first of all, and then what do you look for beyond that?
The series that I produce is performances, And I'm looking for rare moments when not only the artist and the band are performing very, very well, but there's something about the audience interaction and the occasion and the setting. So I'm looking for a story, as well as the performance coming off very, very well. And also we have to get it on tape. That's our job as well. So I'm always looking for a story, because it seems to me that to set up an audience to listen for 20 or 30 minutes to someone perform, you know, you really have to tell the audience what was going on here and get their attention. And then throughout the performance, there can't be weak moments in which the new person who's tuning into your program thinks, what's this? I don't get it. And tunes out, because we have people joining the show all the way through. It's a 1-hour show, but I assume that not everybody begins listening at the beginning, and certainly not everybody is going to stick to it to the end. In fact, the statistics say that the average jazz set listener is with us for 3/4 of an hour. And this is really good, actually. This is something that we're really proud of, because you all know the way you listen to the radio is often very short term and just quick. So, so that's a lot of listener loyalty. That's good. And the story, not only is the story, does it have to be there, but we have to find some way to tell it, which may involve sitting down and talking to the artist, getting some interview, talking to the people that are putting on the show, knowing way far in advance when something like this is all coming to the stage, and we think we have a really good opportunity, because long-range planning is essential. This is not something where you do a lot of taping and then you listen and find out what's good. In order to, you know, use what resources we have right, we have to really think way far ahead and try to get to the place where the real music is going to be made. And we also have a mandate with Jazz Set to sort of get around a lot, so that if you listen to a show one week and it's in Monterey, or we have like 3 Monterey shows in May. That's sort of the mini-series idea. We want to have people know that pretty soon we're going to go to Montreal. We're going to be at the Kennedy Center. We want to let people know that we take you places. Otherwise, we're not quite living up to our promise. And furthermore, if we don't take you places, you can probably get to the same place yourself. You know, so we want to do something you can't do. Get to a lot of places and bring you a lot of music that you just can't do it yourselves. So the idea of having a hook for the timing of the release of the program is always in the background, is always in the thinking. I think just to illustrate, on July 1st, I need to let National Public Radio know what the fall 13 programs are. And so this is 13 weeks, a couple sets a week. I don't have to give them every detail, but I have to pretty much let them know something about each week, so that they can let the stations know, and then the stations will continue to carry the show and feel like, well, this show is too strong to replace it with anything else. So July 1st, before July 1st, I have to be working on the fall. And I have to try to think about, well, what in the fall will people be doing? How can the music match up to, you know, where people's minds are at the moment that we release the music? And in the years that I've been doing this, it's been the most arduous process to learn how to think ahead like that. And I'm sure that if you're trying to get your own music out, that kind of thinking can only help you. You know, what will people's lives be organized around at the time that I get up and perform for them, so that you can connect. And that's, the hook is sort of the shorthand for that. When you release your material, how will it connect with what's going on in the world that you can foresee as much as possible? Then when the good opportunities come and land in your lap, you can plug them in too. I mean, you wouldn't want to turn down the chance to do something on the spot and to take advantage of a last-minute really great opportunity, but you won't be living from one last-minute great opportunity to the next, which is much too stressful to do. And I wanted to also, as a footnote, well, there are 2 other things on my mind. The other is that when I was getting started, I would always call artists directly to get permission to record them, or at one point I edited a music magazine. This is what Billy's reminding me of. And I would call artists and say, could we print, you know, a chorus of the way you played such and such a song, or could we print somebody else's arrangement of your song? And I didn't know about managers or publicists, so I just asked for artist phone numbers and I called them directly. And actually I think this worked really well, but I realize now that artists build teams so that their team can field a lot of this stuff and business can happen faster and more efficiently, and the paperwork doesn't have to pass straight to the artist's hands. I do think that by getting to know artists directly and letting them know that I was working in a publication that might want to print some of their music, that this was a great way to approach people, and probably still is, because printed music and songbooks and transcriptions, but also songbooks that have a look, like a CD always has a look with the cover, which can speak so much about who you are and what you wanted people to see. And a songbook, you know, if you don't want to just sing standards all the time, but you want to sing your own material, well, you have other media to get that material out and to build your reputation and to have other musicians play your music. And so the print medium is still a really good medium to build another side of your career on. And get a good team. And that team will help you think ahead, and when they call to set up an interview, they might say, I know in Nicholas Payton's case, the publicist said, you know, Nicholas is a very fine cook. He can tell you about cooking, and it's the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival time of the season, and everybody's going down there, and there's this whole food thing when you get there. Well, Nicholas knows how to cook, so have him talk about that. You know, that's a strong pitch, because it's not that his music is taking a back seat to the cooking. If he's not a good musician, it won't be such a strong pitch. But he's such a fine musician, you want to know more about him.
Thank you. Jazz on television is, well, jazz is quite missing from television in most cases. I'm proud to be on Sunday Morning, which is the only show on national television that presents on a regular basis profiles on jazz artists. And the woman who really sets much of this in motion, and indeed does pieces like the one we did on Michelle Camilio and several others herself, she has a wonderful feeling for the kinds of hooks that you were talking about, and what we can do and what will make jazz artists interested in someone from Idaho or somebody from Montana, away from the Jazz Center, would be interested in what we're saying about in the profile of this particular artist, whether it's Dizzy Gillespie or Kurt Elling or you know, somebody you know or somebody you don't know, whatever. And so that requires, first of all, I believe, someone who is, first of all, an excellent journalist and an excellent television expert, but also someone who can deal with some other things that maybe she'll choose to tell you. At any rate, how do you go about selecting things that people see on Sunday Morning and other shows that you've been involved in?
Well, Sunday Morning is an odd kind of show. It's on Sunday morning, for one thing. And it's 90 minutes for another. And it's actually, at CBS, comes under the news department, even though much of what we do is arts, culture, and performing arts. So it means that to a certain extent we treat these subjects a little bit like news. Sometimes that works to our benefit, sometimes to our detriment, but you know, all in all, it allows us to really present an eclectic array of people. CBS's mission is kind of to show America, introduce America to its neighbors, you know, in this era of mass marketing, which, as you know, TV is mass marketing. Can't get any more mass than TV. Mass marketing leads to sort of homogenized culture, which means that things are, that a lot of what you see on TV is really a function of the nature of the promotion and the marketing that the artist gets. And so Sunday morning, on Sunday morning, we try to get away from that a little bit. We don't do necessarily obvious people. We don't necessarily do the people who are currently the most successful on the charts. But we do people who are interesting to us. We just, you know, we have a staff of about 10 producers, and, you know, everybody's got an idea. And we find that the best pieces come from people who are the most, from producers who have a very strong interest in a particular subject. And so we, that's really how we choose. I mean, that's kind of how we choose. There's a lot of competition to get on Sunday morning, as you might imagine. It takes us about anywhere from, I would say on average, about 6 weeks to do a story. Wouldn't you say, Billy? Well, about 6 weeks. And then the story has to get slotted into the schedule. And it has to compete with the other stories that we do on the show. So basically, we have one music story a week. We try to have one story in the arts. We always have a story on news, and like that. So I broke it down. I was trying to figure out, you know, what exactly we actually do. And so I broke it down a little bit, and I'd just like to share something with you, give you a little perspective of what we have to deal with when we choose stories for Sunday morning. So we do about 50 music stories a year, because there are a couple of Sundays when we don't do music stories. And also occasionally we repeat some, but I'm just using 50 as a, we have 3 actual music correspondents, if you include Charles Osgood, who's the host, who occasionally does, he likes to do cabaret singers, he likes to do Broadway. So we Broadway performers, like recently we did a profile of Donna Murphy, who is in The King and I, but she's a singer and an actor. And so, you know, we include this in the mix. The other correspondents, of course, are Dr. Billy Taylor, and also Eugenia Zuckerman. Eugenia tends to do more classical artists. She occasionally does dance and other things as well, but predominantly she does classical artists. So with this, each correspondent does approximately 15 stories a year. And now, each story is about 8.5 minutes long. So that's 8.5 minutes a week. And which is interesting when you consider the context that we are probably the one network show that regularly features this kind of music. That's not a lot. But anyway, we altogether, that means we devote approximately 400 minutes a year. Which, you know, which if you consider a concert or an average set, you know, it's not much. Now, but we do have 3 to 4 million viewers, you know, which is good. We actually are leading. The show is about 17 years old and coming up on its 18th year, I think. And we consistently lead the audience ratings every Sunday morning for all the morning shows. And actually, our ratings are higher than the weekday shows as well. So, and our viewers tend to be upscale in the age range from 24 to 50, which is how they skew our demographics. That's how they look at it. We are among the highest, most educated, most affluent, but that's not our only viewer, you know, because we also have, for whatever reasons, a very strong attraction to sort of everyman, you know, people who who look at our show to learn something. And I kind of think of our show as it's almost like going to the movies, because on Sunday morning, if you're up at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in California, to watch Sunday morning, and I hear a lot of people say they tape the show. You know, it's because you're looking for an experience that's different. You know, you want to, you know, you're sitting back and you're waiting to be affected or interested or told something. You want to learn something. You want to be moved. You want to be touched, just like going to the movies. So we, therefore, try to pick people to feature on the broadcast who have interesting stories. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're older, although we tend to do a lot of more mature artists, because their experience, they have a story, they have experience, they have a story to tell. Not only performing artists, but fine artists, and yeah, and even an occasional sports figure or an occasional horse. You know, but people who, well, you know, these criteria apply across the board, really, you know, to any story that we do, not just musical stories. So we tend to do the kind of story that not only tells a person's individual story, but by telling that person's individual story, it allows us to get at issues, you know, that are current in whatever field that they're involved in. It allows us also to just basically kind of tell the story of America, you know, because, you know, we're living in very divisive times. And so we sort of think that, you know, if you see someone on television who's different than you, interesting, somebody who maybe whose name you heard but you never knew a lot about them, you know, we love it when somebody comes away and says, "Gee, I never knew that." You know, that's, for a television show, that's, you know, almost the most you can hope for. The other thing about our artists is that that we choose is that we, and you know, Rachel, you can tell me this. It's because it takes us so long to produce a story and schedule a story. Because we want artists to be able to share themselves. That's part of this whole profile thing. We do want to get a little bit up close and personal. It doesn't mean that we want to put all your business in the street. It just means that we want to know about things that interest you, what influenced your art, your music, because that makes the audience care about you. And I am of the opinion that if you get to know somebody and you get to know something about their life and who they are, and it helps you relate more to their music, then it doesn't just, when you go to buy their music, it doesn't just mean that you're going to buy the latest CD that's out, but that in fact you may buy some others because you know them, and you know, you'll see something on some of their other CDs that, you know, you'd be interested in hearing. I think this works that way.
Yes.
Thank you. I hope so anyway, because the other thing is that I'm convinced that Sunday morning also gives artists, people who promote artists, nightmares because of our schedule changes, and also because they have something coming out, they send us a CD, it's great, it takes us a while to decide and to assign a producer and to schedule, and then we start shooting their performances, and the promotion people always want it on soonest, you know, like now. You know, when we were doing some profiles on several artists who were nominated for Grammy Awards, everybody wants to be on just before the Grammy Awards because that's sort of a high, you know, during the time that there's great build-up for this artist. Half the time first of all, we can't put all the artists that we're doing that are nominated on this one show, and second of all, for us, it doesn't always it's not really always that important whether they get the award or not. We're still going to do them. And I tend to think that, I know in several cases, we've scheduled an artist to appear on the show sort of after the initial public relations and promotion press to get them on. I think it still gives them sort of a second round, a little bit of a bump in sales, just because you know, people aren't necessarily tuned to this 30 days or 60 days or 9-month period. So, you know, I know we don't always make everybody happy with this, but, you know, we do the best we can. And so for Sunday morning, what we like to have people do, we like to get calls, and we like to get CDs. We prefer that you send the promotional material first. Send us something about the artist. Also send us a schedule of where they're performing in connection with the new release, so we can get a sense of when their schedule is. Although frequently I find myself asking people, well, can you send us another schedule? What are they doing after September? Because I know, that we may not even get to shoot, right away. Just because you send us the material and we like it and we say we're going to do it doesn't mean that we're able to jump on it right that second. So that's important to consider. We get lots of, as you can imagine, we get lots of requests and lots of. We hear from lots of artists who are interested in getting their work on, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean if we don't do it the first time, we may do it like the next year. I mean, it's just, limited time, limited time. So much to do, so little time is basically how we look at it. So that is a sort of a kind of a perspective on how we operate on Sunday morning.
One of the ways that we hear about artists, in addition to the radio, is really print. One of the important things that all artists need is to have things written about them, whether that is in book form or media. Those of us in radio and television use the printed material as guides in many cases, to at least get us started, to give us a perspective, and to help us do some of the things or figure out some of the things we might want to do with the artist that we have in mind. So whether it's, as I said, in a newspaper or a magazine or in book form, it's very important to a wide variety of people in the business. How do you relate to that in terms of what you do?
Well, I'm going to say, on my way to this festival, Cara Freeland, who's Nina's manager and one of her managers and sister-in-law, asked me what I was going to talk about. And I said about how women musicians should deal with the print media. And Cara asked if I was going to talk about how to keep the press away from the musicians. And I think a little humor is a good thing, because it's usually very stressful for anyone to try to catch the attention of the print media. Editors have the pressure of the bottom line on them, and they want to be sure that they'll attract readers. So this is usually the situation that all musicians face, and the more famous you are, the more the editor is going to be open to doing a story about you. And I'm not sure that I can tell a woman to do anything that a man doesn't have to do to build a career and to catch the editor's attention. Many of the challenges are the same for both sexes. There are two primary tasks. One, a woman must develop herself as a musician, and she must play as much as possible in public. And in these ways, she can prove herself to everyone concerned with the jazz scene. And even though I see many more stories about women jazz musicians these days, they still are overwhelmingly outnumbered by the men. And one reason is that the editors are men, so are most jazz writers. And only since 1988 or so have most of us become aware of the growing presence of wonderful women players. So it's still an uphill battle. Once a woman knows that she can play or arrange or compose, and she shows off her gifts, she should concentrate on attracting supporters. Some of them will be musicians who will give her jobs, work opportunities. Without these mentors or supporters, even just occasional ones, no musician can build a career. And furthermore, a woman must immediately and simultaneously try to catch the attention of the media. And this is where I come in and the editors come in. It's very important for a woman to keep the lines of communications open between herself and the music magazines. She should know who the critics and the editors are at all the magazines and newspapers. That's something like Rhonda said, that the people should know who the music directors are, the people at the stations. They're the ones who make both the first decisions and the final ones about which musicians are written about. If a musician can afford to pay a professional publicist, that would be wonderful. That would be ideal, the first thing to do. If she can't afford a publicist, she must do the job herself. She should write press releases about her appearances, her awards, everything of interest in her career. If she works as a side person in the group of a well-known leader, she should keep the editors and writers informed. She should never be argumentative or too aggressive, but she should be firm in presenting her material to editors and writers. And my advice is to send material and then follow it up with a phone call, maybe a week later. As a writer, I know it's very difficult to get a magazine to publish an article about any musician who hasn't led a group on a CD. It's easier these days than it used to be for a woman to call attention to her own CDs. It's still not easy, of course, but you must keep trying to do it. I suggest that you blanket the media, the editors, with good CDs, and you can send them to the writers too. This can be an expensive proposition, a big investment, and somehow you must have a fund, a savings account, a wealthy friend or a relative to provide a budget for publicity of this sort, because exposure counts for so much once you have something to expose. If you can't afford to send CDs, then even cassettes can be helpful. Now, not to the radio stations, but to a writer or to an editor. I know I listened to them. Roberta Pickett once passed me a cassette, and I thought it was really good and varied, and I sent it along to several musicians, and even to Marion McPartland, and then Roberta then became a guest on Marion's show, and since that time she's made a great deal of headway in her career. So it can happen. It does help to do this. You never know when you're going to catch the attention of someone who likes what they're hearing. You will often be discouraged. Your progress can be painstakingly slow. It can take you years to establish yourself. You must persist beyond all reason at times, it will seem, and in the long run, no effort is ever wasted. So when you're young and determined, or even not so young and determined, you should be able to find energy to keep up your efforts for a long time. Don't rue the fact that you don't have a famous mentor who knows all the publishers. As you go along, you'll find a mentor here, a booster there, a fan or a friend with a good suggestion, an editor who loves your work, a record company that will take a chance on you, or a leader to hire you, a friend to steer you to a satisfying gig. Most of all, keep working, keep playing, and the path will lead to someplace worthwhile if you keep those lines of communications open with the people who can expose you even more. I'd like to add that I'm a part of this panel today because of a book I wrote on jazz. It was called Madam Jazz, and because of the late Helen Keane was the person who gave it the final boost. She actually told Oxford University Press to publish it when she was asked what she thought of the subject, and she knew a little bit about it. So when she had a chance to make things move and shake, she did it. She was always willing to tell you exactly what was on her mind, and she was unafraid to tell you how competent and qualified she was and how great her ears were as a producer, and she was correct. And she was willing and delighted to praise others and make things happen for them too. So you may be shy about telling someone else how good you are, but I noticed that the tactic worked very well for Helen Keane, and she called attention to her strengths. It's true about her. Yeah, she was wonderfully confident. And she called attention to her strengths, and all of us can take a leaf out of her book. One way is to make sure that the media knows who you are and what you're doing. That's about all I can tell you. Make sure that you're out there.
Each of the women on the panel, as you can tell from what they say and from what you may know about them, is in a position to speak from experience on many of the subjects that concern all of you here. So who wants to lead off with questions?
I have two questions. My first is for Rhonda. Could you give us a sense of how important it is for a young independent record producer to use one of those people that get the records to the radio stations? I don't know what their name is, and but you pay them something per week. How much do you pay them? And would you say that it's a good idea for young musician independent producers to do that?
Oh, certainly. I think that's very helpful. If you have a professional, someone who knows the people, that's the best way to do it, and they can get your record at the key radio stations, the ones that will do you the most good, definitely. Yeah.
Do you have any idea of how much it costs? No, it varies. Okay. Oh.
For straight ahead jazz, for doing one format at radio, it's generally going to run to get a top quality independent promotion person or firm about $400 to $500 a week. So it can be prohibitively expensive, especially if you consider that some of these guys and gals, ladies, are taking projects not just from independent labels, but also from major labels, also from people who don't yet have distribution. Although, as Rhonda said earlier, it's probably not just a waste of money to be spending dollars on an independent promotion person if you do not yet have distribution, but I think it can also hurt your credibility. In other words, if you've got a release and yet there's no way to get it into the stores, not only can it be a waste of money in terms of you're not going to be able to sell that record, but also the next time that a record comes out, perhaps they're going to be like, well, you know, last time, gosh, I had this thing slammed into heavy rotation for 12 weeks, but it wasn't until I already burnt it out or put it into recurrent rotation that that it started actually getting into the stores. You know, there's just the timing isn't quite right. But if you are either self-distributed or work with independent distributors to get your records in the stores, you know, you have to set aside a marketing plan, a marketing budget, and in that budget very well might be independent radio promotion.
And how long should you keep this person?
It depends on the project, but generally I'd say 10 weeks, give or take, you know, 2 weeks or so.
Okay.
Sometimes if you have an independent promotion person to help you get started, in other words, your first ad week, you know, first getting it on the radio, and making sure that you're blanketed just in terms of getting it added. If you're out of money and you can supplement those calls with your own, you might be able to use that independent promotion person for fewer weeks, and because the hardest part is just getting it on the station, getting it bumped up in rotation, assuming that the record has the merit and is programmable at that station. You can kind of, that's not brain surgery.
There's one medium that we haven't talked about today, and I was just wondering if anyone on the panel would have any comments about the internet, because last week when I was on the internet, I think I counted like 468 websites of everything from artists to jazz festivals to even you can take a jazz theory class for free over the internet. And I know in our band, we've got our website, and we put our musician's bio on it. We've got individual bios. We're working on putting sound bites and even a video clip. And any criticisms that's written about our band, we're throwing them out there. We're putting our performance schedule on there. And I just wonder if there's any comments that you all might have.
Before there's a comment, what have you found that's done for you to do that?
Well, I get email from, I got an email from a guy in Japan who wanted to know how to bring the band over, and he was like, a band full of women? And, you know, tell me about this. And for me, because and the one thing about this festival too, it's wonderful. However, there's so many women that get coverage that are on the East Coast or the West Coast, but there's a whole bunch of us in the middle of the country, and that kind of get overlooked. And the internet is our way. Like I can know who's going to be playing at the Blue Note, even though I live in Kansas City, Missouri. You know, and it's a great medium. And I just wonder if. I know you guys are so busy with your schedules, but is that another way? Is that going to be the future for us? Is that like the electronic press kit for the musicians to be thinking about?
Well, speaking for Verve, we do have a website, and it's part of the Jazz Online site. And we are also linked to many radio stations and publications. So, you know, so if you're checking out, SW Networks or KLON or one of their websites, you can say, for more information about the artist of the week or, featured artist of the day, or various record labels, our label and our artists are among them. But we spend a lot of time and energy on our website. Because we have such a large roster, it's hard to regularly keep up on, like I said, we'll have, an itinerary book this thick of where everybody's going. So that's hard to keep up with. But certainly, biographies and sound clips and artwork from all of the new releases, we try to update it regularly and put it in there. But the fun part is starting to link up with, like-minded organizations.
So that's another area that musicians should be thinking about
Very good
then?
one.
It's
Absolutely, and it's becoming less expensive to build your own website. I mean, you can, I think, buy software for like $70, and with a lot of sweat and frustration, you can bang it out yourself.
Right. I should comment.
Yeah.
On
Rebecca?
the website, Jazzset, we have pages with our schedule, and Branford Marsalis, our host, his picture is on top. And we've gotten a lot of email from people who found us on the web. So I'm real happy about this. Another opportunity I see is that Daryl Grant, a pianist, I think he's developing this. Last summer he had the idea that he would, with other musicians, put up lead sheets for their new compositions for a while.
Kennedy Center has a website. You want to talk about that for a moment, anyone?
Kennedy Center actually has two websites. One is for the center itself and covers our performances here at the center. But in addition to that, we have something called Arts Edge, which is an interactive education service. And it would actually be possible to get information from the artists who are performing here as well as other artists, and to set up a listserv for jazz artists. So if you have access to the internet, it's quite possible that we could create a venue for you to share information. Arts Edge has been up for, I guess, about 3 years now, and I would encourage all of you to take a look at it. But if we can talk to some of the participants here to find out what would be most helpful, the types of information that would be most helpful to you, then we can try and set up a format on the website that is useful, because the important thing is that it has to be useful information and it has to be interesting information, because that's the only reason why people use it. People browse a lot, they'll come by and they'll hit your site. If nothing catches their attention, they move on, they don't bookmark you, and you never see them again. So if you can keep getting things that are timely, that are interesting, people will come back again and again to your website. I don't know if I have the address. We actually have the address. The Kennedy Center website will also get you into Arts Edge. It's http Kennedy Center, that's with a hyphen between Kennedy and Center, those are all lowercase, .org. And that will get you into the center site as well as .org, yes, .org, organization. That will get you into both sites. But please check out Arts Edge. Also, in terms of jazz education, Dr. Taylor actually has a set of his lectures that are on Arts Edge, which is Billy Taylor's Jazz at the Kennedy Center, What is Jazz? And we also have information on some of the radio show artists on there as well.
The gentleman who was just speaking, just for your information, is the gentleman who did all the work of putting this festival together. I think he deserves a hand. His name is Derek Gordon, and he is the person who is responsible for the education department here and all of the things that this comes under, and many other things that we do that have really taken a giant step in the last few years are his doing. So he's, remember that name, Derek Gordon. Yes, ma'am.
Is I used to have my own radio program in Chicago on National Public Radio called Talking to Volusia, and yesterday I discovered the tape of an interview that I did with Mary Lou Williams. And I listened to it for the first time. This was the year before she died. And there are a couple of things that she said that I thought might be kind of fun to pass on today to you guys here, to you girls, whatever. One is that I asked her about whether she had had any trouble working in the jazz field as a woman. And she said, I never thought about the fact that I was a woman. Men were always asking to play with me because I knew what I was doing. And I thought that was, the way she said it was no ifs or buts about it, And then the other thing was I asked her about her conversion to Catholicism, whether she thought that made any difference. And she says, oh, heck yes, I'm playing a lot better since I became Catholic.
I just became a partner in a production company that is going to, and I'm heading up the music division where I will specifically target jazz artists and develop music videos for them. The response has been overwhelming and positive, yet two problems that we are coming across. One, the artists are saying the labels don't want to invest, first of all.
I'm sorry?
The labels don't want to invest, put money out into videos, and two, if they do, who's going to play them? I also work at BET full-time, and the Jazz Channel, I know, is just starting to get off, but what can we do to make artists want to come and do this, make labels want to invest in doing videos for these artists, and then once we do that, get the MTVs, the VH1s, the boxes to put these videos in their rotation?
Okay. We're starting to make more videos and more electronic press kits, but I'd say a large reason for our recent increase, which is moderate, is not just for U.S. use, but because it can be used for promotional uses outside of the United States. And so we use videos and EPKs extensively outside of the U.S. and sometimes we'll be able to get foreign repertoire centers, Verve or Polygram companies from other countries to pitch in, especially if an artist happens to be signed through their repertoire center. So probably, I would think that with other labels as well, anybody who has an international organization is going to be much more likely to be able to cough up some dollars than a label that is strictly U.S.-based or U.S. distributed. Until there are more outlets, it's going to be difficult. So we are making videos. We made one for Roy Hargrove, and certainly we'll have footage from the upcoming film Kansas City in video form, and which will have the soundtrack too. But until there are more places to get it aired, unless it's for international use, promotional use, we're going to be limited in how many dollars we can spend. Those dollars would probably be better spent elsewhere.
It's always going to be dictated by the marketplace if things remain the same. So the only way you can change it is to change the attitude of people who are within your sphere of influence. If you can get people around you to request and very adamantly request that they show jazz, more jazz, without reference to format. You say they don't show it on the current, on VHS1 or on any of the other places where one sees jazz video. You don't see that much of it on BET, which is the only game in town. So we keep hearing promises of other things that are coming, but while, you can die while you're waiting. So it really comes back to many of the things that we've been saying from various points of view. You really have to establish the groundswell somewhere from within the jazz community that says this is what we want to see as well as hear. Probably by the time we get this in action, the action is going to be on the net, because that's the thing that's growing. So I would suggest that everybody that can get on there, because the picture and sound and everything's going to happen there, and it's cheaper and it's easier. So if you can get the same kind of quality that we're talking about in your records and tapes that you're sending out, we suggest that quality be the highest quality that you can make and afford. If you can do that on the net, you have a chance of at least being seen and being able to control the quality. You won't be concerned about whether it sells a zillion copies or anything. You're only concerned about getting your message out there.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
With regard to Sunday morning, again, we like to receive printed information because we like to know as much about the artist as possible, and so articles help a lot. We also like to see the artist perform, so sometimes tapes are helpful. because we like to see what they look like when they're performing, if we are not familiar with them. And also, we got an electronic press kit is sometimes helpful. Doesn't mean that we're going to air it, but it does help us, again, see how well the artist is able to articulate what they're doing, what they look like on camera, talking, that sort of thing, which really helps a little bit to influence our opinion. Occasionally, we've used music videos in a piece, but sparingly, because we tend to shoot original video as much as possible. And so, which is one of the reasons why what we do is so unique, because actually if Sunday's Morning has done a profile on the artist, it's probably as comprehensive as anything that's ever been done on them in terms of video. And so, you know, that, so we don't, you know, and frequently music videos, well, we label them as such, but it's not part of the sort of look of CBS News. And so it can be an element of a piece, but not, you know, not the whole thing. We'd rather shoot the artists performing themselves. We don't even, when we do stories about somebody who's a director or something, or we review a movie or something like that, when we get movie trailers, you know, we recut them to suit what we're doing. This is a similar, you know, it's a similar application. So it's helpful, and also I might say I think electronic press kits are certainly cheaper to do than a music video as such, and so, you know, it's a thought. I got something recently from an artist, and I got a CD, and it's really funny because you get so many. So I was just going through, and I thought, okay, I'm going home. What will I listen to? I picked the CD, and I started listening to it. Halfway home, and I wanted to, you know, I got a little promotional CD, one cut, and then I got, so I took the one cut. I was listening to it. I got halfway home on the West Side Highway and wanted to turn around and go back and get the rest. I thought, why did I leave that in my office? This is so great. So then the next day I went and I looked at the press kit that was sent. It was just an interview with the artist about why they did what they did. And I was totally blown away. I said, we have to do this person. So, you know, before that I had never heard of them.
Who was it?
Hannibal.
Marvin Peterson?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there you go. You never know when lightning will strike.
She did it.
You did?
When he was young, I did his poetry party, everything. Yeah.
Do we have another question? Yes, ma'am.
Since you, all of you, whoever is involved, receive so many tapes and CDs and videos, you can't possibly look at all of them, I'm sure. So what grabs you? I mean, what makes you pull that tape and go listen to it in your car on the way home?
I was curious,
Luck?
you know, and I had a moment. You know, some people are people that you know, you've heard of, and if we haven't done them, you know, sometimes we feel like it's time we did. And I must say, we're sort of heavily weighted toward more, I guess, more established artists, I suppose, as a way of, you know, because we don't discover new talent. You know,
We do sometimes.
Well, it's rare that we discover an unknown. We may highlight a talent that is sort of newer on the scene, and but we don't. We tend not to discover a new talent that's never somebody who's never, simply just because we don't have, you know, again, like I said, it's limited time. I mean, that 415 minutes that we have is divided between, a third of that is devoted to jazz. It's not, you know, so, you know, you want to do things that you're pretty sure are going to interest people. Everything we do, we know is going to interest people. But, you know, it's just a competition of that.
I would add quickly that I think my first impression is made through what I see. Then I decide whether to listen. This may be a little backwards, but it's true.
Yes.
From the viewpoint of someone who uses the press kit, I've heard you talk about video press kits and having clear copies of your bio and that sort of thing. But you see all these photographers around here. One thing that I don't get in press kits all the time that I need are very good, clear, black and white pictures. If your skin is dark and your hair is dark, have your photograph taken in front of something lighter colored. If your hair is light and your skin is light, you can be photographed in front of a black or dark background. Make certain that it's not a snapshot taken in front of a tree or a bush. Have your instrument with you. If you play a horn, you may have seen the article in the Washington Post. Faustina Dixon was on the front page because her horn, her hands, and her face were in that picture, and it was clear. Think about what people are looking at. Don't worry about your hair. Don't worry about all that other stuff. Think about the message you're trying to get across. The people will use the picture if it's clear, if it indicates what you're doing, and if it has some life in it.
Mary Johnson has single-handedly made the Kennedy Center very, very jazz conscious, and for that I'm grateful to her.
You give me way too much credit.
Not at all. Other questions, please? Yes.
Do the record companies actually listen to the tapes that are submitted to them, and do they actually get back to everyone that sends a tape to them?
Okay. Well, first of all, I will mention that I don't do A&R.
Do you know?
But yes, I do know. And every record company is different, and every A&R person, and I can't off the top of my head think of an A&R woman, which is unfortunate. Every A&R person is different. In our case, we do accept unsolicited material, and everything gets listened to eventually, but the operative word is eventually. So it may take months, because out of all the hundreds and thousands of tapes that we get, one of our 3 A&R people is designated to listen to tapes, and he checks everything out, but he's on the road, I'd say 3 out of 4 weeks recording with somebody, and then he gets back, and unfortunately he has the office directly next to mine, plays these things at very loud volume, so I know for a fact that he actually does listen to all of this stuff. And we have signed a few people from unsolicited tapes, but it's extremely rare. So it's possible, it happens.
Is it more of a disservice in the sense of the cost to submit, let's say, a good press package, to have a CD? It may be a cost of thousands of dollars to a lot of people. Now the quality of what you get may vary, but there may be a lot of high quality, high cost, high effort things that go to the major record companies. And if the people knew that eventually they would get listened to, maybe even a year down the road, not so much even a couple of months,
yeah,
and that they would get responded to, I think that they would appreciate a response,
right,
one way or another. I think not getting response is sort of doing a disservice to a lot of great artists that are out there.
right.
If that happens.
It's going to be virtually impossible to get an A&R person at Verve on the phone to say, hey, did you listen to my tape? I mean, it can happen on a really good day. But, generally you're going to have to try on the phone a lot. But also, generally the responses don't come in the form of the A&R person getting on the phone and saying, you know, hey, I want to sign you tomorrow, or sorry, this ain't going to work. It's going to be basically in the form of a form letter, because he gets hundreds of these things every week.
That's what I would expect. And does that happen? Do those form letters go out?
I don't know all the procedural stuff, but I know that a lot of them do go out. Generally, letters go out to people who are known or associated to the A&R person first, probably out of guilt. I don't know. But I suppose anybody that sends a CD, a tape even, is entitled to some form of response, and it may take forever. But if you can't get the A&R person's, if you can't get the A&R person on the phone, they'll generally have some form of assistant who will be able to hunt down the answer for you.
Finally, Rachel, do you think that if very few people can get listened to or a deal or responded to that way, would it be more of a service to artists not to take these tapes? If what I've heard is true, I don't know what the reality is with the majors, but I hear that there's just rooms full of CDs and tapes that just sit for months or years and people never actually get an answer.
Yeah.
Is it more of a service to the artist not to do it?
No. Months, yes. Years, no. And jazz is much kinder than top 40 and urban and country western even. You know, these things do get listened to, at least, you know, I can only speak for my own company. And again, it's not even my area of expertise. I just happen to, you know, be in the environment. If you do have a way of getting your name known to the A&R person through a fellow musician, I think that's, you know, if you've got a mentor, if you're studying with so-and-so, and that person really believes in you, that artist is going to have the most direct, or she is going to have more direct access to an A&R person to talk you up and say, hey, you know, you really got to go check out this person, than, you know, if you get a lawyer to send this thing for you, or if you send it yourself. A&R people hang out with musicians. They hang out with them at 2 in the afternoon and at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they're out there in the clubs. And I think, you know, from what I can tell, you know, that's where they're getting their information to a large extent, is from other musicians.
You have to understand that the music business is just that. It's a business first. And so whatever may be polite or reasonable has nothing to do with it. I mean, really, I mean, in reality, it doesn't. So don't be offended if someone doesn't answer or doesn't get back to you in the time that you think they should. It doesn't mean they're disinterested. It just means that they're busy in many cases. So if you can find other ways to tweak their memory. Harry Connick Jr. told the most interesting story I've heard about how he got his contract with CBS Records. He sat on George Butler's doorstep after he had been introduced to Butler by Wynton Marsalis, which he thought was his entree. He couldn't get a hold of him on the phone. Nothing happened. So he went and sat with in George's office until George's secretary got sick of him and said, please get this guy out of my office so I can get something done. But he's a very charming Southern gentleman and knew how to do that without her throwing him out. So, but it is a business, and you have to be aware of that and not, you know, and work with it. And say, okay, since I didn't hear from him or her, I'll call and I'll do what's necessary to try to get some successful answer. But you really, even at best, you may not.
I'd like to add something to that. On Sunday morning, you know, if we call you back, we're interested. I mean, if we don't call you back, it may mean that right now we're not interested. It may mean that right now we don't have a place to deal with this. It doesn't mean we never want to do anything on you at all, ever. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But it just means it may mean we haven't gotten to you yet. It may mean, yes, we do want to do you, but we don't want to call you yet before we can answer some of the obvious next questions that you're going to ask us, like when, you know, and you know, and that's contingent on a bunch of other things, because our 10 producers typically do. They may be working on 4 stories at once, different kinds of stories, not just music stories. Everybody doesn't do music stories, you know. So, and events, since we're a news show, you know, events of life sometimes take over. So we have a really thin, you know, we're stretching, you know, really thin on this level, and so frequently I have people call me a million times, and you know, I don't have voicemail because I don't want to listen to all the messages and all the promotions, you know. So, so you know, when we get back to you, that's when we're ready to deal.
Other questions, please. Yes.
Good morning. I have a question for Rhonda Hamilton. My name is June Gardner, and I work with the American Music Center in the jazz department. And I'm asking the question of, in terms of jazz, and with the influx of classical and jazz coming together for perhaps promotional to get your package out there further, i.e. Diane Reeves, you know, did some things and then went back to jazz. Rochelle Farrell did all those things. And I'm asking the question because in New York City there's a big influx right now that I see of like hip hop and jazz and classical and jazz. I know Blue Note just had a release party that I was there for, a big compilation series of the original the original solos of jazz artists, and then maybe they have hip-hop beats around it. My question is, in terms of your programming and in terms of WBGO, what type of slot could that type of music, or classical jazz, or all those kind of formats, could that fit into what you do?
It's possible maybe on a limited basis. We used to have a program on Saturdays that was called, I can't remember the name of it. I think it was a house party where we focused on music more in that genre that you were talking about, like maybe jazz and hip hop. But we don't really have a program like that now. But we do have such a variety of programs, like we have a Brazilian jazz program, we have a Latin jazz program, we have blues programs. So, you know, there's a possibility, but to be in the regular rotation, jazz and hip hop, I don't think on WBGO it's going to be a big part of our regular programming. Although that's not to say that we might not play it, you know, just once in a while just to give people an opportunity to hear it. But that's not our focus, I don't think.
I'd like to thank our wonderful panel. Did you enjoy that? Did you learn something? I would hope that you would talk to Leslie and talk to Marquita and all of our panelists afterwards, because they all have much to say that we didn't have an opportunity to have them say, and they all are full of information that is really useful for all of you. So thank you very much. Come down to the jam session.
Okay.